Chuck Zukowski is a paranormal investigator who has spent more than 25 years investigating phenomena like ghosts, UFOs, and cattle mutilation. We'll talk with Chuck about bizarre animal mutilation cases and the evidence suggesting a cause much more mysterious than a simple predator attack. Plus, Maureen and I will discuss a declassified U.S. Air Force prototype for a flying saucer and the new Meteorite Exhibit and other space and UFO news.
I'm Jeff Notkin from television's Meteorite Men, and that's right now on Spacing Out.
Greetings everyone and welcome to Spacing Out. I'm Jason McClellan.
And I'm Maureen Ellsbury.
Thanks for joining us. We have an interesting episode for you today. We're going to be talking about cattle mutilations with paranormal investigator Chuck Zukowski. But first, let's talk about what's in the news. Recently declassified records from the United States Air Force Aeronautical Systems Division reveal plans from the 1950s to develop a flying saucer. The National Archives recently published the details of this project called Project 1794.
Wired.com explains that had the craft been completed, it would have been able to spin through the Earth's stratosphere at an average top speed of about 2,600 miles per hour. The specs show the craft was designed to be a vertical takeoff and landing VTOL plane, using propulsion jets to control and stabilize the aircraft.
The documents reveal that the Air Force had contracted with a now-defunct Canadian company, Avro Aircraft Limited in Ontario, to construct the flying saucer. Continued development of the prototype would have reportedly cost $3,168,000, about $26.6 million in today's money.
A team of scientists is betting that extraterrestrials have embraced solar energy.
In September, a team of 3 astronomers began searching the universe for Dyson Spheres, basically massive structures of solar panels. Although it may seem presumptuous to assume what type of energy technology alien civilizations might be implementing, team leader Jason Wright explained to The Atlantic that the assumption is mostly based on biology. Life, by definition, uses energy, which it must re-radiate as waste heat. The larger the civilization, the more energy it uses, and the more heat it re-radiates. Life also, by definition, reproduces, which introduces the possibility of exponentially increasing energy demands. If left unchecked, those increases will eventually outstrip the available energy on a planet. That would leave a growing civilization no choice but to mine energy from other planets and eventually their stars.
If Dyson Spheres exist, their heat signatures would be visible to infrared telescopes. Earlier attempts to locate Dyson Spheres have been unsuccessful, but Wright's teams will have access to better tools that weren't available to previous researchers, like NASA's Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, WISE, which is hundreds of times more sensitive than the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, IRAS, that was used in previous searches.
The team's search for Dyson Spheres will last 2 years and will span the Milky Way as well as millions of other galaxies. According to The Atlantic, this latest Dyson Sphere project recently received a sizable grant from the Templeton Foundation, a philanthropic organization that funds research on the big questions that face humanity, questions relating to human purpose and ultimate reality. A woman claims she photographed a UFO in the sky above the English town of Halifax on Saturday, October 6th.
According to the Halifax Courier, the photographer, Joanne Holdsworth, spotted 2 silver spots in the sky from her car while she and her son were on their way to North Halifax Grammar School, where her son was scheduled to take an entrance exam. The son reportedly suggested the objects were 2 planes. After Holdsworth and his son watched the objects for a while, she took a photo. But as she explained to the Halifax Courier, she couldn't really see because it was so bright when she took the photo.
When she looked at her photo the following day, she saw a large blob in the sky, and she told the Halifax Courier, "I didn't realize it was so close." Holdsworth doesn't know what the UFO or UFOs were that she saw in the sky that day, but she's trying to figure that out. And the Halifax Courier is asking anyone who might be able to help identify the strange object she photographed to contact their news desk.
A couple months ago, we told you about a new television show debuting on the Science Channel titled Professor Weird. The pilot episode aired on August 18th, but this pilot episode is the only episode of Professor Weird that has aired so far.
In case you missed it the first time around, the Science Channel is re-airing this episode. Dr. Franklin Ruhl, aka Professor Weird, explains that in this pilot episode, special attention is directed at possible alien abductions. Professor Weird airs tonight, Friday, October 12th at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Pacific Time, and then again on Sunday, October 14th at 2 a.m.
Some of you might remember that earlier this year, the Science Channel devoted the month of March to exploring the question, are we alone? Well, it appears the channel is repeating this exploration. In addition to re-airing of Professor Weird, the Science Channel is also re-airing episodes of Morgan Freeman's Through the Wormhole, as well as the show NASA's Unexplained Files. Check your local listings for showtimes.
A meteorite exhibit opened in Phoenix last week, and Maureen and I were fortunate enough to be able to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
So we're here today at the Arizona Challenger Center in Peoria, Arizona for the ribbon cutting of a new meteorite exhibit entitled They Came from Outer Space.
Now, this is a really interesting exhibit, and it's put together by Aerolite Meteorites. And you might recognize the name because Aerolite, the man behind that, is Jeff Notkin. Jeff Notkin's a fan of the show, a friend of the show, and we've had him on.
Jeff is a star of the show Meteorite Men, and this exhibit features meteorites he's actually found on the show, as well as the tools used to find those and some of the props and outfits they've worn during the production.
I really like the presentation of this exhibit. They've done a good job of laying out the meteorites, illustrating some of the atmospheres where these meteorites have come from, the environments, and the tools used to do that. And it's a really good tribute to the show too, I think.
And it's open for the next year, so make sure you get down here and check it out because it is really neat.
Before the actual ribbon-cutting ceremony, Notkin spoke to a crowd of about 80 people.
The only way we're going to stay an important contributor to science and innovation is by getting young people interested now. If none of our youngsters are interested in science, where are we going to be when they're in their 30s and 40s and should be doing their important research and doing their papers? 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Officially open.
After the ceremony, we met with Jeff.
That's so cool.
And he gave Spacing Out a little preview of the exhibit.
In this cabinet, I've put together a collection of meteorites that my co-host Steve Arnold and I found on the show, and also some of the tools and equipment that we use to locate and excavate them. And there are a few really interesting mementos in here as well. Original director's slates from several of the episodes. And one of my favorites is this shiny silver roundish meteorite on the left-hand side of the shelf. And that was used by the designers at Orange County Choppers in New York when they built the Meteorite Men motorcycle for us. Almost all meteorites are very rich in iron, and most of the meteorites that we found in our careers have been buried under the ground. So in order to locate them, we use a wide variety of metal detectors, and I brought 3 of my favorites here for the They Came from Outer Space exhibition. They're built by Fisher Labs in El Paso, and they are very adaptable. They're also lightweight and extremely sensitive. So if you're in the right spot, using the right equipment, there's a good chance that you can find one of these mysterious visitors from outer space. I think my goal with this exhibition is for visitors to come here, look at the props, look at the wardrobe, look at the meteorites, look at the metal detectors, and walk out that door and go, wow, I want to learn more about this. This is a fascinating field. And meteoritics, the study of meteorites, is a small science, but it's a growing science, and it embodies so many fascinating disciplines, including astronomy and chemistry, mathematics, physics, to an extent geology and cosmology. All of these different disciplines are wound together in the study of meteorites. So if young people or old people come here and take away with them a question in their mind or a desire to learn more and investigate this fascinating field, I will be the happiest exhibition designer in Arizona.
So Jason, that was really fun going out to the AZ Challenger Center, and we're really glad we got to do that. And Jeff's show, if you haven't seen it, Meteorite Men on the Science Channel, you should definitely check it out. Speaking of Science Channel shows now, the Professor Weird, I think everyone already knows my feelings on that show. So it's interesting they're repeating all of this, and also that we haven't seen any more episodes, but I'm not surprised.
Right. This is quite a while to go with still kind of recycling the pilot episodes. It's interesting. I wonder why they're doing that. And again, I haven't seen the show, so I have to reserve my full judgment on it. I've seen some of the previous stuff that Professor Weird has done, so I'm not too sure how to take it. So I do need to watch this show to be able to give my opinion on it. But I will say, I mean, with this flood of UFO content on TV, on networks all over the spectrum, it's interesting to see the Science Channel going back and kind of rehashing and re-airing episodes they've already aired of all these shows.
Well, I think it's quite possible that they're seeing that so many other people are doing it and that other people are getting good press from it and good, traffic, that they kind of want to take what they already had and see if it brings back anything. But
get more use out of the products they have. It could be a good business move on their part, but it's definitely a topic. This UFO topic and topic of extraterrestrial life is something the Science Channel, as of late, has been really interested in exploring.
Right. So, but speaking of the public being more aware about UFOs, I think we're seeing a lot more UFO videos and photos being taken. This Halifax one, I think you and I both agree that we feel that it is actually just a water droplet, most likely a water droplet on the outside of the windshield reflecting.
That's what it really looks like, because this woman took the photo from the inside of her car, and her son said it looked like two jets. I mean, this blob you see in the photo doesn't look anything like two jets. So, and she said it was bright when she took the photo. So I think, she took it, and then again, she looked at the photo a day later, and she just saw this thing in the photo and thought, wow, it's closer than I thought it was.
Right.
I think she's seeing something that wasn't actually there.
I agree. So we're going to write that one off probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's big news this last week. I don't know why the media latched onto it so much. I mean, I guess it's sort of a big deal for public, for people who aren't really involved in UFO research and familiar with this, but the fact that the Air Force, was involved in trying to develop flying saucers.
Yeah, I mean, Project 1794, I mean, I think it's pretty cool, but we already knew about this. I mean, we've seen the fact that they were doing this before, and Michael Schratt has written articles on our website about this.
Right, aerospace historian Michael Schratt, he's been involved in this research for a long time, and we do have articles on our website about these various saucer projects that the Air Force was involved in.
But what I like about this declassified file now is that we're getting to see what they actually projected, not only the cost of this, which is astronomical in modern day, the money you switch there, but also the speed that they expected this to go.
The tech specs are really cool to see, and you're right. I mean, that's why this story is newsworthy, because rather than this coming from people saying, oh, there's all this secret stuff the government's working on, this is actually declassified information. So we've got their information now, their specs that this craft supposedly, they were hoping would be achieved by this craft, and as well as the diagrams. And
I'm actually, okay, so what I'm surprised about at this one is that we haven't, see, it's been kind of big news this week, that we haven't had a lot of people coming forward, at least that I've seen, and saying, well, yeah, but what did were they reverse engineering something that's probably, not from this planet, and this is how they developed these plans for this propulsion system?
Yeah, surprisingly, I haven't seen talk like that, and I would totally expect something like that.
I think that we're probably just jumping the gun here, and by the time the end of the week, we'll see a lot of that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that'll come out, and sort of the reason why the Air Force was exploring flying saucer technology and where that technology came from. And very interesting, but it's cool to see that we're starting to get some of this stuff declassified that I think a lot of people feel should have been declassified a long time ago.
Only takes 62 years, no big deal.
Oh yeah, dragging their heels, but what do you expect?
Nothing more.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so that's what's in the news this week, guys. It's now time for us to talk with our guest, Chuck Zukowski.
Chuck is a paranormal researcher who investigates a wide variety of phenomenon ranging from UFOs to Bigfoot. He's also a leader in the field of cattle mutilation research. And with a background in law enforcement, Chuck knows proper investigation procedures and how to properly collect and handle evidence.
But why are we talking about cattle mutilation? Well, on this show, we focus on space, UFOs, and the search for extraterrestrial life. But we also like to explore other mysteries of the universe and things people might assume only exist in science fiction. The manner in which some cattle are mutilated defy conventional explanation, and some suggest a possible connection between UFOs and cattle mutilation.
And as someone who actively investigates cattle mutilation cases, Chuck Zukowski is the ideal person to ask about the subject, so let's do that right now.
Chuck, thanks so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I'm just kind of moving my cursor over here to the other screen. Oh, there it is. All right.
All right. Well, this is the first time we've addressed the topic of cattle mutilation on this show. So we're excited to have you on. You're a good friend of ours, and when it comes to cattle mutilation, we love talking with you about this subject. How long have you been investigating this strange phenomenon?
It's actually been a few years now. I started looking into cattle mutilations way back. God, I don't know how many years it's been. Because what happened was some of the UFO sightings I had in the past were near places where people had cattle mutilations, and so I started getting involved with the cattle mutilations while I was investigating UFOs. And even one time when I went down to Marley Woods with Debbie to investigate some lights down there, was a mutilation that had occurred in that area. Where these weird lights were popping up and ET entities were showing up, all kinds of nifty things were going on. So it seems like that there's always like a correlation between cattle mutilations and something bizarre that has to do with UFOs. So, gosh, I guess it's probably been well over 15 years at least. When I first got into start researching it, probably longer than that. It's kind of hard to say. Because some of the times, like I said, some of the previous investigations I've done, I've kind of incorporated, the mutilations as part of the UFO sightings.
You just had another occurrence just this last month, correct?
Yeah, actually, over the Labor Day holiday, we had a mutilation case out in Trinidad. So Sunday night, or sometime during the daytime, Sunday, the Torres family, I think it was one of the workers with the Torres family, had found this cow dead, and contacted I guess it would have been his uncle. And he went and saw the mutilation on a late Saturday or Sunday afternoon. And then during a Labor Day parade, Monday morning on Labor Day, obviously, he was talking to another rancher Mike Duran, who I did a mutilation case for back in 2009. So I think I have one of those mutilation cases that you recently had. And so rancher Mike Duran talked with him and said, yeah, that sure sounds like a mutilation case. And then he called me. And all day Labor Day, we were trading phone calls back and forth so I could get the phone number of the actual rancher who had the mutilation. And finally, by about 5:30 Labor Day evening, I guess, late afternoon, I was able to talk to Rancher Torres. So we left here, I guess I left about 5:30 in the morning, Tuesday morning. And we were in Trinidad a couple hours later meeting the rancher. Now, the problem with mutilation cases as opposed to other type of investigations is with the mutilation case, you really have to jump on it really quick. You can't wait. With cattle mutilations, the whole purpose of investigating mutilation is trying to get the best evidence you can out of the mutilation, which means you have to get there pretty quick for the mutilation to still be fresh. The longer it sits, the more, obviously it gets, contaminated, and then, it's just basically there's more outgassing, and then you have scavengers, all kinds of flies, all kinds of stuff. So anyway, you have to get there probably within 24 to 30 hours to really get some really, really good samples. Or in my case, what I try to do is, what I want to do is get the whole animal into a lab to do a necropsy in the lab and blood work and the whole bit. But you have to get there when the meat's fresh, and when you get there too late, the best you can do is maybe take samples if it's not too contaminated, or take soil samples or whatever. So problem is getting to the animal as fast as we can. And the problem with that is sometimes the ranchers don't know these animals are dead till about a day later because they're free grazing animals. So that means by the time I find out about it, if I ever find out about it, it could be a couple of days later. In this case, Saturday night, and I'm there Tuesday morning. Met with a rancher in Trinidad, and off we went another 45 miles way up. This is one of the prettiest sites I've ever done a mutilation case, up in the pine trees.
And it's pretty secluded, right?
It is pretty secluded. Actually, as it turns out, when I was looking at the GPS coordinates, I was really a mile away from New Mexico, inside the Colorado border. So, we did some moving to get way out there. And it's so secluded that for all the listeners out there, or watchers, I should say, you're not going to find people walking through that remote part of private property to do a mutilation. So this was a pretty exciting mutilation. Unfortunately for me, sometime Monday night, big old black bear got in there and got a hold of the carcass. And so that kind of ruined my chances of taking any type of samples. I already knew that it was probably past the time frame to take the animal in. And that's as per Colorado State University basically gave me requirements. This is what we want. So, you know, they're so fired up about it, they gave me requirements. You know, they said, well, if it's beyond a certain time frame, we lose a lot that we can do in the lab. So they said 24, 30 hours, and then maybe you could stretch it if it's cold, you know, because, you know, that slows down the process. And so anyway, we got there. The animal, well, the first thing I should say, the very first thing that we noticed when we got there was the animal at one point was laying in a 22-foot diameter, I hate to say crop circle, but just imagine a crop circle where the vegetation is around that area was probably a good 8 to 10 inches high. And then the cow was sitting in the middle of a depression. So there's about 22-foot, 19-foot diameter, maybe a little over. Could have been a perfect circle, but because of the vegetation, by the time we got there, that's what we measured. And it was all pressed down. It wasn't overlaid like a, you know, like a crop circle. It was just pressed down. So the interesting thing was, you know, the very first thing you saw was this unusual depression. This is the third time I've seen this in Colorado. Last year, the Miller case in August had a similar depression on the ground, not as noticeable as this one because the vegetation was a lot smaller, or shorter, I should say. And then the year before that in Crested Butte, you know, we saw an animal laying in the middle of this depression. So it's really interesting. I'll go into that a little bit in a couple of minutes of what we're finding out, you know, about these depressions. But what's interesting about this particular case was when the bear got to it, the bear actually pulled the animal out of the depression before he started eating on it. Not quite sure. I mean, it was about a 400 or 500 pound cow because it was a fairly young cow born in March, and the bear, I'm sure, was about the same size. So I'm not quite sure if the bear had to drag it while he was eating it, because we didn't see any evidence of carnage on the ground where the bear would be eating it and dragging it, pulling it back. It seemed like the bear pulled it out of that depression and just sat there and just started eating on the backside or the hind area. That was the con, is the negative was the fact that the bear got to it. Now the positive is I got a picture of the animal before a predator like that got to it. And now I've got pictures of what it looks like when the predator gets to it, like a bear. So for all the skeptics out there and the non-believers thinking that a predator did this, here's a clear example. Hey, look, this is what happens when, you know, when a bear gets to it. This is what happens when we don't know what the hell got to it. And so we had that comparison. So there's always a positive for every negative that comes out of some of these investigations. And right there we have this perfect proof of a bear getting into the animal.
Yeah, that's terrific. You're right. There's so many people who you know, throw out that predators are responsible for the damage that's caused to these animals, but that's awesome that you were able to get those and compare them. Now, for people who might not know, in the cases of, I guess we could say, legitimate mutilations, what are some of the signs that are, you know, the strange mutilations that take place that tell you, that are signs for you that it wasn't an animal that did it?
Well, the first thing, obviously, first thing I want to say before I go into that is, mutilation cases are very, very, very dangerous. They're just not like, hey, you got a ghost investigation, let's go. You know, I've had people do that to me. A mutilation case is a dead animal, and you don't know how it died. And that's a good question you asked, because the first thing we look for is, you know, evidence of how it died. We look for, first off, loss of blood. If there's massive amount of blood around the animal, then it would look like that the animal was taken down by a predator. And then we start looking for predator damage. And I have seen cases like that, not on a cow, but I've seen cases like that with other animals where you can see the claw marks, you can see the scuff marks on the ground, you can actually see, you know, that there was an incident there, something that killed that animal. With a mutilation case, you walk up and there's absolutely no sign of blood. There's unusual incisions on the animal, different parts of the body. It could be the side of the head. It could be a hole here in the upper part of these. I'm describing some of the ones I've actually investigated. The anal area is cored out. The udder area is cored out. not the other area, the udder. The tongue is missing, and then in one case, the teats on the udder itself were cored out. And so you see these unusual holes in the animal. You see no blood oozing from the side. You see no blood coming from the area or even pooling inside of the cavity of the animal. And there's gallons of blood in a big animal, especially a 1,000-pound animal. So it's not something that can hide in an animal, especially if it was killed by predators or and then eaten by scavengers being fresh. So that's the first thing you kind of look for. The reason I wanted to say it's a dangerous thing is because, I mean, here in cases here, actually, just within the last month here in Colorado, we've had 60 cows up in northeastern Colorado die of anthrax. So this isn't something that you can just jump into. I mean, when I talk about this on shows or even on my blog, I do get emails. I'd like to go with you too. And I said, well, there's a certain individual that has to understand that you can die from this. This isn't just, going to investigate a UFO or light in the sky or something. You're looking at a dead animal and you have to know the signs. You have to be able to talk to, the veterinarians. You need to talk to the ranchers. You have to get a feel for, what took that animal down. Obviously, if I got called into an incident where there's a half a dozen animals dead, let's say the first thing I would think about is obviously a disease. And so I would go in, and one of the main things he's looking for blood coming from the nose and blood coming out of the anal area. I mean, anthrax is a nasty thing, and it's naturally occurring in the soil. At least it is out here in Colorado. And in some cases, because ranchers may be third generation ranchers, because they're actually introduced to the anthrax, molecules. Not molecules, but they're larger than that. At a young age, and maybe over generations, they have immunity to very, very small amounts where, hey, I'm coming from the city. I come out there and bam, it hits you. May not die of it because it's not in large amounts, but still, it's something that you have to consider. And not only anthrax, but there's other viruses too. And you have to be able to handle the smell too.
Right. Not something I probably would want to do. But so you also, I mean, you have cases where you're also measuring for things like increased radiation or electromagnetic activity going around the animals. I know in past cases. And I am very curious what your theories are on, you said you had a theory about this depression in a couple of these different cases and what that might be and how relating to the actual mutilation itself. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
EMF readings. I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of other investigators that do cattle mutilation investigations use an EMF meter. I started using it because I was using my EMF meters for not only ghost investigations, but for UFO sightings and all. Looking for any type of trace evidence of the electromagnetic field being placed there. So I started using it on cows and horses, and so I got a baseline with generally a dead cow or dead horse on anywhere between 8 to 12 microteslas. Anything that jumps up to about 50 microteslas, that's an anomaly. Mm-hmm. And there's a case, the Aaron case a couple of years ago, I think it was 2010, where there was a gaping hole in the side of the head, and I picked up 100 microteslas off that. It was actually literally pegging the meter of my EMF meter. Now, my EMF meter is not like a K2 meter that you see on ghost hunters. What it is it's a natural tri-field EMF meter. It's a little more expensive than the K2. Well, it's at least twice more expensive than K2. And it has a filter device in it that filters out EMFs that man kind of generates, wires and stuff. And the neat thing too is I can move it away from the animal and turn it on, and it sets to the ambient atmosphere no matter where you're at. And then as I bring it closer to the cow or to whatever I'm measuring, that's where it's the anomaly. So I had this animal that had a gaping hole inside its head, and I waved the meter over it, and I had over 100 microteslas. It was just pegging my meter. So I contacted the company Alpha Labs who designed the meter and actually got a chance to talk to the person who designed the meter. And he says, well, it actually looks like that you picked up some type of residual energy from whatever you were measuring. And I told him it was a cow. And he goes, well, you're picking up 100 microteslas from a dead animal because the Earth is only 50 microteslas. So I was picking up twice the Earth's magnetic field from a dead animal. And so I said, Could it possibly be that there was something electronic in there and left a residual? It goes, absolutely. That's what it looks like. And you can, if you have electronic devices will leave a residual signature when they're taken out of animals or taken out of humans or whatever. And basically, how you look at that is if like a FLIR device, and the FLIR obviously measures heat. So if you put your hand on a tabletop and you move your hand away, a FLIR will see the outline of your hand because you left a residual energy, heat, energy. You left it on there. And that's exactly what the tri-field meter was picking up, the residual energy. Now, over a period of time, that would dissipate. But I was there quick enough with that one that I was able to pick it up. So I saw that one other time before. We had a case out here in Rush, Colorado, where 2 horses were killed. And we had 2 surviving animals. We had a colt, and then we had a dog, and the colt ended up having, it had some marks on its nose and marks on the side, and the dog had marks on the inside of its paws. And the dog, I picked up 50 microteslas, so I picked a really high EMF off of the dog, and just by sheer luck, a neighbor was there with the same size dog, and so I was able to use his dog as comparison analysis, and sure enough, it was about 8 to 10 microteslas on a normal dog, 50. So what happened was this poor dog was charged up with an EM field, and whatever the dog and the surviving horse experienced really messed him up for the following year. I mean, the personalities changed. I mean, they actually experienced and survived the mutilation. It's a pretty cool case, and I still talk to the rancher about it from time to time to see how the dog's doing. The horse, they had to sell the horse. The horse would no longer go out into the area where the other 2 horses were mutilated and would stay inside the corral, and it was, the personality changed completely. It wasn't friendly anymore, and it was very aggressive. So the rancher had to sell it. They didn't put it down; they just sold it, got it out of the area. It's fine now because it's not in that area. And now I have another case in Labor Day that I'm waiting for those analyses to come up and see if they're actually going to fall into the same type of pattern we're seeing with other samples. It's pretty cool.
Well, Chuck, the cases you work on always fascinate me. You do really good research, and I know you always have, some of these cases where you're waiting on results to come back. You have ongoing cases. So for people who are interested, what is your website where people can follow your research?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's ufonut.com. It's ufonut.com. And the reason why it's a nut is because when I first started...
Because you're a nut, but yes, go ahead and explain.
Yeah, I got called. I was called a nut so many times. I decided just to go ahead and make a website and put on my license plates. And since then, I've just called the UFO nut.
Yeah, and then they can also check out that you do have quite a few video investigations of your different cases. And then I'm assuming we will see a video episode of this Labor Day case as well in the future.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Very cool. So everyone can check out the cases and keep track of your progress. And thank you so much for joining us. It's always fascinating. And I still love the fact that you are the one person I know that has said that after investigating cattle mutilations, you always crave a burger.
I do. And we did it again, too. We went out, we had a nice, juicy hamburger. It's what you do.
You're a nut, Chuck, but we love you. Thanks so much for being on the show. We'll talk to you later.
Hey, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Sure.
Take care.
That's all for this episode of Spacing Out. Be sure to visit openminds.tv for all the latest news. We want to thank Chuck Zukowski for being on the show, and special thanks to Jeff Notkin and the AZ Challenger Space Center for allowing us to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new They Come From Outer Space Meteorite Exhibit.
Now, Jason and I will actually be in Minneapolis, Minnesota next week for the Paradigm Symposium. So unfortunately, there won't be a new episode of Spacing Out next Friday. But we'll be back on October 26th to talk about our experience at the symposium. And if you're planning to attend, which you should, we'll have a table there, so come say hi to us. And for more information about the event and how to get tickets, visit paradigmsymposium.com. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Maureen Ellsbury.
And I'm Jason McClellan. We will see you in the future.